Ladies and gentlemen, conspiracy theorists, and anyone still rocking an AOL email, welcome and hello. It is I, your favorite obscure social studies teacher, who's just libertarian enough to irritate conservatives and liberals alike, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, folks. How you all doing out there? Thank you for your continued support, the tens and tens of you across the fruited plain that listen to this podcast. I appreciate it so much. Please do not hesitate to spread the word about this podcast to your friends, your family, your coworkers, your communist cousin, whoever you think would benefit from a good time, a little entertainment, and some education. Because here at the Professor Liberty Podcast, we don't claim to know everything. We claim to have just an expertise to make things interesting. If you'd like to email the show, the email is professorliberty1776@gmail.com. That's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. One more time for those of you in the back of the classroom on your phones, that's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Boy, I got a good one for you today, folks. I'm so excited. This was actually an idea from somebody, a follower on Facebook, and this was their idea. So I said, you know what? Let's do it. And boy, it's been quite a week. These last 2 weeks, let's say, since Trump was sworn into office, I have to admit, this is new territory for the Professor Liberty Podcast. Seeing that we only had President Biden in office when we launched back in February of 2021. I must admit, so far it seems President Trump 2.0 gives me a ton of material for the show. I already have a tariffs episode in the works as we speak. But today, however, we are going to deep dive into a cornerstone of American citizenship, the 14th Amendment, and its implications on birthright citizenship. Right after his inauguration, President Trump signed an executive order getting rid of birthright citizenship. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're going to take a look. As this bold move, it redefines citizenship and it sparks a legal debate, raising questions about how we interpret the 14th Amendment in the context of modern immigration issues. At the crux of this issue is the question, what does the phrase, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, unquote, really mean? And should it exclude children born to undocumented, or I guess now that Trump's in office, we can say the word illegal immigrants? Strangely enough, despite the importance of birthright citizenship and all the debates surrounding it, the United States Supreme Court has never directly ruled on whether the 14th Amendment guarantees birthright citizenship for all children born in the United States. So let's break down the history, the legal arguments, and what it all means for the future of American citizenship. Strap in, because it's going to be a journey through history, law, and controversial current events. So let's stroll back to post-Civil War America, a nation in turmoil, struggling to rebuild and refine itself after 4 years of brutal conflict. The Union was victorious, but the country faced a monumental question. What now for the former slaves? The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery, but the question of citizenship was far more complicated. Who would be recognized as full members of the American community? The answer wasn't clear, and that's where the legal battle had begun. Before the Civil War, the landmark case, Dred Scott of 1857, I often tell my kids in class, one of the most infamous Supreme Court cases of all time. They ruled that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not citizens of the United States. Chief Justice Roger Taney's opinion claimed that black people were, quote, beings of an inferior order, unquote, and, quote, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, unquote. This ruling was not only a devastating blow to Black Americans, but it also exposed the massive gap in our legal framework, a glaring omission in a nation that was supposed to be founded on the ideas of liberty and equality. This racial exclusion was the framework in which Congress debated the Reconstruction Amendments. Those are the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, became the cornerstone of the Reconstruction era's efforts to transform America. While the 13th Amendment ended slavery, the 14th was less about freedom from slavery and more about granting full former citizenship to those who were former slaves, ensuring that they would be recognized as a part of the American political community. Section 1 in the 14th Amendment grants citizenship, guarantees due process, and provides equal protection under the law. Under Section 1, the 14th Amendment sought to rectify the moral and legal wrongs of the past. It guaranteed that no state could deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. And it firmly established the principle that anyone born or naturalized in the United States was automatically a citizen. This was a profound declaration of inclusion, not just about granting legal recognition to free slaves, but laying the foundation for a truly equal society. In reality, the 14th Amendment was a repudiation of the Dred Scott decision. It firmly closed the door on any future legal attempts to argue that Black people or anyone born on the United States soil could be excluded from the rights and protections afforded by American citizens. The intention was to ensure that equality and citizenship rights would no longer be denied based on race or ancestry. Now let's dissect the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. It states, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States, unquote. The intent seems pretty crystal clear to me. The citizenship clause ensured citizenship for freed slaves and their descendants, but it did more than that. It also includes an inclusive definition of who can claim American citizenship. One key figure in this debate was Jacob Howard, a U.S. Senator from Michigan. He was a strong advocate for abolition and civil rights during the Reconstruction era. Howard played a pivotal role in drafting the 14th Amendment, particularly introducing the Citizenship Clause. Howard believed that the 14th Amendment was meant to establish a broad and inclusive interpretation of U.S. citizenship. He argued that anyone born on U.S. soil, except for children of diplomats or Native Americans under tribal jurisdiction, should automatically be a U.S. citizen. And obviously, this is a direct response to the pre-Civil War legal framework, which excluded African Americans from citizenship. In Howard's view, the purpose of the amendment was not only to grant free slaves citizenship, but also to ensure full political integration of these individuals into American society. However, from his own mouth, using primary sources here at the Professor Liberty podcast, we can see that Howard didn't think everyone was included. There are carve-outs. Howard is quoted as saying, quote, this amendment, which I have offered, is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. However, he says this, quote, this will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to families of ambassadors or foreign ministers, but will include every other class of people, unquote. At that time, many in Congress worried about the implications of extending citizenship to children of immigrants. Critics like Senator Edgar Cowan of Pennsylvania argued that this would lead to problems by granting citizenship to children born to foreigners who weren't fully loyal to the United States. We'll talk about that in a minute. This was particularly concerning to those who feared that it would encourage immigration from poorer countries or that it would dilute the American national identity. Some critics today still argue that the 14th Amendment wasn't intended to grant automatic citizenship to children of foreign nationals or illegal aliens. They base this argument on the originalist interpretation of the Constitution, which seeks to strictly adhere to the intent of the framers and not try to modernize the text or the meaning of the text. And here at Professor Liberty, we obviously are originalists. We are strict constructionalists. Another podcast I have in the works is The Pardoning Power, and I had to kind of dig deep in there, and I went through a couple of rabbit holes, and these preemptive pardons, I would have assumed, were not legal, but I guess it appears they are. But I was reading from the text of the Constitution in Article 2. But I digress. So the originalist view of this is Howard says from his own words, we have the record, that yes, if you are a naturalized citizen, or if your parents were born in this country and you're born in this country, you're a citizen. So originalists point to the language of the 14th Amendment itself, particularly the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What does that mean? And that phrase is crucial. And I think as this goes up through the courts and when it finally gets to the Supreme Court of the United States, that phrase will be the crux of the decision that the court decides. The jurisdiction clause is the key to understanding who was intended to be included in this broad citizenship guarantee. This part of the clause has often been the center of debate because it makes an explicit distinction. It's not good enough to just be born on U.S. soil. The person must also be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. The authors of that amendment didn't put that phrase in there for no reason. It was carefully crafted to distinguish between those who are owed full allegiance to the United States and those who by their virtue or status did not. For instance, since our whole founding and since the advent of this amendment, the 14th Amendment, diplomats and foreign ministers who serve over in this country, when they have a child, nobody says that child is an American. Why? They are not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. They are ministers of a foreign nation. Now, if the framers of this amendment truly intended the 14th Amendment to apply to everyone born in the United States without exception, regardless of their parents' status, why would we have these carve-outs in the first place? Why make special reference to diplomats and Native Americans? These exceptions are not incidental. They point to a nuanced understanding of jurisdiction and allegiance. A child born to an illegal immigrant or someone on a temporary visa, for example, their status is outside the bounds of former allegiance to the United States, and this raises a more complex issue. These parents, by definition, have not pledged allegiance to the United States, nor are they under any full legal or political duty to do so. They are not citizens. And while they're subject to the laws of the land when they're in here, right, when you're in the borders, you can get pulled over, you can go to jail, things like that. They don't have the same standing or relationship with the country as a nationalized citizen would. Writer Hans von Spakovey, a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, wrote back in 2018, quote, "It is just plain wrong to claim that the children born to parents temporarily in the country as students or tourists are automatically U.S. citizens. They don't meet the 14th Amendment's jurisdictional allegiance obligations. They are, in fact, subject to the political jurisdictions or allegiance of another country, namely the country of their parents. The same applies to children of illegal aliens, because children born in the United States to foreign citizens are citizens of their parents' home country," unquote. And let's talk about that allegiance real quick. Since we're talking about the legal history and the intricacies of the 14th Amendment, let's talk about allegiance. When we discuss who gets to be a full member of the American community, it's one who is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. We're also talking about loyalty and national identity. Now, this past week, you guys probably heard Selena Gomez published a video that went viral where she was crying and she was weeping for, quote, her people, unquote, Mexican nationals who were being deported by the Trump administration. Now, Selena, who I'm pretty sure was born in the United States, is an American citizen by birth. Yet notice how she openly identifies with the people of Mexico, a country she is not a citizen of. Now, I fully understand it's understandable to empathize with others, especially when it comes to harsh issues like this. But there's two sides to every story. And for every illegal alien that is getting deported because we're actually enforcing federal law on the books, only government gets to not enforce the law and not get in trouble. But you better pay your taxes or you're going to jail. Anyway, I digress. For every illegal alien that is being deported, what about those American citizens, some of them Hispanic, that have died from fentanyl, that have been raped? Laken Riley, who was jogging on, she was taking a jog and didn't know she was going to get raped and her head beat in with a rock. Where's the empathy for that? So this really speaks to how you see your identity as Americans, right? Are we really a part of one national community, or are we divided into all these little categories? Black History Month, Hispanic History Month. Where's American History Month? Shut up, you fascist. On a similar note, we've seen the president of Mexico make similar statements. She even cited that, quote, Mexicans are doing a lot of work in the United States, unquote. And she was reminding people that Mexicans are contributing to the U.S. economy. Well, aren't you basically admitting they're not U.S. citizens, but rather foreign nationals? It's not a question of how hard you work or how much you contribute. It's about who you owe your allegiance to. And that's exactly what the 14th Amendment addresses when it talks about jurisdiction. The people who are, quote, subject to the jurisdiction, unquote, of the United States are those who owe their loyalty to the U.S. government, its laws, its principles, and those whose primary allegiance is to the United States, not somewhere else, not another foreign country. Now, proponents to birthright citizenship often point to U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark in 1898 as a pivotal case defending the broad interpretation of the Citizenship Clause. In this landmark Supreme Court case, Wong Kim Ark, a man born in San Francisco to Chinese parents who were subject to the Qing dynasty, found himself at the heart of this crucial legal debate. After traveling to China, Wong was denied re-entry into the United States on the ground of his citizenship status. The Supreme Court, however, ruled in his favor, affirming the principle of jus soli, that is, right to the soil. Anyone born in the United States soil, regardless of their parents' nationality or immigration status, is automatically a U.S. citizen. But not everyone agrees with this interpretation. Conservatives like Mike Howell argue that, quote, legislative history makes no mention of illegal immigrants being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, unquote. In fact, many critics of birthright citizenship like to point out that in the Wong Kim Ark case, it was a child of lawful permanent residents, not undocumented immigrants. And that's a key distinction. A few years before the Wong Kim Ark case, the Supreme Court issued a significant ruling in Elk v. Wilkins, 1884. In that case, the court decided that Native Americans born on U.S. soil were not U.S. citizens under the 14th Amendment because the native owed his primary allegiance to his tribe, not the United States. The case involved John Elk, a Native American born on U.S. reservation, who tried to register to vote in Nebraska. He argued that, as a U.S.-born citizen, he had the right to vote. The court disagreed, ruling that Elk was not fully subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, as he was considered a member of a Native American tribe, which the court viewed as a, quote, foreign nation, unquote. Elk v. Wilkins is often cited in modern discussions about the jurisdiction aspect of birthright citizenship, particularly when it comes to children of undocumented immigrants. Again, like we've said earlier, the case emphasizes the person's allegiance and jurisdiction, not just the fact that they were born within American boundaries. The 14th Amendment originally intended to ensure citizenship for free slaves, but it's now being used as a backdoor to citizenship for individuals whose connection to the United States has been temporary or tenuous at best. It was supposed to be a protection for those already tied to the U.S., and it's being turned into a tool for people to manipulate the system for long-term gain with little regard for U.S. immigration laws or national identity. So how did we get here? Why are we suddenly flooded with swaths of people whose parents might not be citizens? Well, you can look to our government, Congress, presidents of both parties, who for whatever reason didn't have the will to enforce immigration policy. However, I did hear that President Barack Obama earned the nickname Deporter-in-Chief due to the large number of illegals his administration deported. Another reason, and one that author Michael Anton makes, is that the issue has never been explicitly addressed. Anton, writing for The American Mind, makes the argument that birthright citizenship was simply hoisted upon us by the left. He writes, quote, "The American people did not willingly, knowingly, or politically adopt birthright citizenship. They were maneuvered into it by the left and the left-allied judiciary. They've never debated it or voted on it. They've simply been told that it's required by the Constitution. Polling shows that a sizable number of Americans, though not a majority, support ending birthright citizenship. Were the nation to hold an honest debate, those numbers might rise. Of course, that's precisely what the liberals and their allies on the conservative left fear. It's not simply their legal arguments that are weak, their political arguments are even weaker. Since they know they would lose the debate, they are desperate not to have it, which is why they demonize anyone who tries to raise it," unquote. Before we wrap up, let's take a step back and remind ourselves of a fundamental truth. Every sovereign nation has the right and the obligation to define who is and who is not a citizen. A nation's borders are not just lines on a map. They represent a connection between a government and its people. That contract demands that the country knows who's within its borders and who's contributing to its communities and who's living under its laws. And it's not just about security. It's about ensuring that every citizen, not illegal, but citizen, from the rural farmer to the urban teacher, is living in a society that is governed by shared values and principles. And at the heart of this contract is allegiance, as we've mentioned. Citizenship isn't just a bunch of paperwork or geography. It's about loyalty. It's about saying, I belong here and I'm invested in the success of this country. Like John F. Kennedy said, what can you do for your country, not what your country can do for you? And a lot of the immigration coming today, this wave of immigration is, what can I get out of the United States? Not necessarily, what can I do for the United States? Immigration without assimilation is just invasion. And it's about fundamentally altering the fabric of a nation. And this is happening all across Europe. And this is happening in our country as well. And I'll just say that a nation without control of its own citizenship, a nation without control of its borders, is indeed a nation on shaky ground. Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into one of the most controversial, hotly debated, and legally complex issues in American constitutional law, birthright citizenship. We'll see what happens. Frankly, I think that Trump and his legal team knew that his executive order would get blocked, and so he's wanting to have this discussion. He's wanting to have this debate. And frankly, this is going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court so we can finally have an explicit ruling on this matter. Citizenship is about allegiance. It's about what it means to be an American. And while the law may seem clear at first glance, as we've seen today, the interpretation is anything but simple. Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. Also, share this podcast. Also, give me a written review. Go to Facebook and like the Professor Liberty page. Check out teacherspayteachers.com if you want to buy activities, worksheets, assignments for your homeschool and classroom needs. It's a great way to support Professor Liberty financially. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.